My name is Rebecca Wilson, and at 42 I never imagined I'd be starting over from scratch. After dedicating nearly 20 years of my life to a man I thought I knew everything about, I'm now left questioning whether I ever really knew him at all. I met Daniel when I was barely 22, fresh out of college and full of dreams about changing the world with my journalism degree. Daniel was 28, established in his career as a financial consultant, and seemed like the most stable, reliable man I'd ever met. When other guys my age were still figuring out their lives, Daniel already owned a small house in the suburbs of Chicago and had a 5-year plan that impressed my parents to no end. We married after 2 years of dating, and I willingly set aside my journalistic ambitions to support his burgeoning career. "It's just temporary," he'd assured me. "Once I make partner, you can pursue whatever you want." I believed him because that's what you do when you love someone. You trust them. You compromise. By 27, I had given birth to our first child, Emma. 2 years later came Lucas. My days became a blur of diaper changes, school runs, and maintaining the immaculate home that Daniel expected to return to each evening. The dream of returning to journalism gradually faded, replaced by the reality of being a full-time mother and housewife. "You have the most important job in the world," Daniel would say whenever I expressed any restlessness about my abandoned career. His words were kind, but they always felt like beautifully wrapped packages with nothing inside. Empty platitudes to keep me content in my assigned role. Don't get me wrong. I loved my children fiercely. Emma, now 15, had my analytical mind and her father's confidence. Lucas, 13, was gentler, artistic, and sensitive in ways that sometimes seemed to disappoint Daniel, though he never said it outright. Daniel's family had always been a complicated part of our marriage. His parents were distant figures who lived in Florida and visited only on major holidays, treating our home like a hotel when they did. But it was his younger brother, Richard, who proved to be the most challenging relationship in our extended family. From the moment I met Richard, something about him set me on edge. Where Daniel was controlled and methodical, Richard was charismatic and impulsive. He never married, never seemed to hold down a job for more than a year, and always had some new business venture that required just a small loan from his more successful brother. "He's family," Daniel would say simply whenever I questioned these frequent financial requests. That was always the end of the discussion. What bothered me most was the way Richard spoke about Daniel behind his back. To his face, Richard was all brotherly admiration and gratitude. But when Daniel wasn't around, the comments would start. "Danny always was Dad's golden boy," he'd say with a smirk while helping himself to our expensive whiskey. "The perfect son who could do no wrong. Must be exhausting keeping up that facade all the time." I defended my husband, of course. "Daniel works hard for everything we have." Richard would just give me that knowing smile, like we shared some secret understanding about Daniel. "Sure he does, Becky. Sure he does." I hated being called Becky. Richard knew that. For 18 years, our lives continued in this carefully constructed routine. Daniel's career flourished. He traveled more frequently for work, sometimes gone for days without much communication. I raised our children, maintained our home, and tried to ignore the growing emptiness inside me. The kids were getting older, needing me less, and I found myself wondering what would fill my days when they eventually left home. Then came that Tuesday morning in April, the call that changed everything. I was in the middle of preparing lunch when my phone rang. An unfamiliar voice identified herself as a nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. There had been an accident. Daniel had collapsed during a meeting. Heart attack. They'd done everything they could. The world tilted sideways. I remember sliding down against the kitchen cabinets until I was sitting on the cold tile floor. The phone still pressed to my ear as the nurse asked if I needed someone to come get me. My mind raced with practical questions even as my heart refused to process what I was hearing. How would I tell the kids? Should I call them home from school now or wait? Did Daniel have life insurance? Where were all our important documents? The next few days passed in a blur of arrangements, phone calls, and consoling my devastated children. Emma retreated into stony silence, while Lucas cried openly, seeking comfort in my arms like he hadn't done since he was small. I moved through it all in a state of numb efficiency, handling the details because someone had to. Richard arrived the day after Daniel's death. letting himself into our house with the emergency key we'd given family members years ago. I found him in Daniel's study, going through desk drawers when I returned from meeting with the funeral director. "Just looking for the will," he explained, not quite meeting my eyes. Danny mentioned he'd updated it recently. I didn't question him at the time. There were too many other things demanding my attention, and Richard had always had an unusual relationship with boundaries where his brother was concerned. The morning of the funeral dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect spring day that seemed inappropriate for burying my husband. Emma helped me select a simple black dress, while Lucas sat on the edge of my bed, clutching his father's favorite tie. "Do you think Dad would want me to have this?" he asked quietly. I sat beside him, running my fingers over the silk material patterned with tiny geometric shapes. Daniel had worn it to important meetings, considering it his lucky charm. "I think he'd be honored," I told Lucas, watching him carefully fold it and place it in his pocket. The funeral service was scheduled for 11 a.m. at the church where we'd been nominal members for years, attending mainly on Easter and Christmas. I'd chosen a closed casket. The idea of people filing past to stare at Daniel's lifeless body felt wrong somehow. When we arrived at the church, I was surprised by the number of people already gathered. Daniel had been well respected professionally, but I hadn't expected this level of attendance. Colleagues from his firm occupied several rows. Neighbors and parents from the kids' school clustered together, exchanging hushed conversations that fell silent as we walked past. Richard appointed himself unofficial greeter, standing near the entrance shaking hands and accepting condolences as though he were the chief mourner rather than the deceased's brother. I noticed he was wearing an expensive suit I'd never seen before, new from the looks of it. "Becky," he said, putting an arm around my shoulders when we reached him. "You're holding up well." His breath carried the faint scent of alcohol, despite the early hour. I stiffened under his touch but said nothing. This wasn't the time or place. The service proceeded as planned. Our pastor spoke kindly about Daniel, though it was obvious he barely knew him. A colleague from Daniel's firm delivered a polished eulogy focusing on his professional achievements. When asked if I wanted to speak, I declined. What could I say about the man I'd shared my life with that wouldn't feel inadequate or worse, like I was just realizing how little of himself he'd actually shared with me? As we moved to the graveside for the final ceremony, I noticed a commotion near the back of the gathering. The minister was speaking about eternal rest when I saw them, a woman and a teenage boy, perhaps 16 or 17, standing slightly apart from the main group of mourners. The woman was attractive in her late 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a fitted black dress that seemed more appropriate for a cocktail party than a funeral, and large sunglasses despite the cloudy conditions that had developed during the service. The boy beside her was what caught my attention and held it. Something in the shape of his face, the set of his shoulders. I couldn't place it, but a strange unease crept through me. Emma noticed my distraction. "Mom? Who are you looking at?" I shook my head slightly. "I'm not sure. I don't recognize them." As the service concluded and people began to disperse, I lost sight of the mysterious pair. The reception was being held at our home, and I needed to get back to make sure everything was prepared. Richard had insisted on driving separately that morning, claiming he needed to run an errand before joining us at the house. I was in the kitchen arranging the catered food when the doorbell rang. Emma answered it before I could get there. From the kitchen, I heard her confused voice. "I'm sorry, who did you say you were?" I wiped my hands on a towel and walked to the entryway to find the woman and boy from the cemetery standing awkwardly on our doorstep. Up close, the woman was even more striking. High cheekbones, almond-shaped eyes rimmed with expertly applied makeup, and a mouth set in a determined line. "I'm Vanessa," she said, extending a manicured hand. "This is my son, Ethan. We're here for Daniel's reception." There was something in the way she said my husband's name, familiar, intimate, that made my stomach tighten. "I'm Rebecca, Daniel's wife," I responded, emphasizing the last word slightly. "I don't believe we've met before." Vanessa's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose above her sunglasses. "No, we haven't." Daniel preferred to keep his compartments separate. A small choke sound escaped my throat. Emma looked between us, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning comprehension. "Perhaps we could speak privately?" Vanessa suggested, glancing meaningfully at Emma. I nodded stiffly. Emma, please go check on your brother. Make sure he's eating something. My daughter hesitated, clearly unwilling to leave me alone with these strangers, but ultimately obeyed. I led Vanessa and Ethan to Daniel's study, the one room in the house least likely to be disturbed by reception guests. As soon as the door closed behind us, Vanessa removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes that were red-rimmed despite her composure. I apologize for the timing, she said, her voice steady. I debated whether to come at all, but Ethan insisted he had a right to say goodbye to his father. The words hung in the air between us like a physical presence. I gripped the edge of Daniel's desk, suddenly grateful for its solid support. His father, I repeated, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. Vanessa nodded once, sharply. Daniel and I met 8 years ago at a financial conference in Seattle. I was working as an event coordinator. Our relationship continued whenever he was in town. When I discovered I was pregnant, he was clear about his situation here, with you and your children. But he didn't abandon us. He provided for Ethan, visited when he could. He was planning to tell you eventually. My mind raced backward, calculating. 8 years ago. Lucas had been 5, Emma 7. I'd been fully immersed in motherhood while my husband had been creating a second family on the other side of the country. I looked at Ethan properly for the first time. Now I could see it clearly, Daniel's strong jaw, the same slight dimple in his left cheek, those distinctive eyebrows that both our children had inherited. The resemblance was unmistakable. Does Richard know about you? I asked the question, surprising even me. Vanessa's expression shifted. Richard? Oh yes. He's known for years. He's actually the one who suggested we come today. He said it was time for everything to be out in the open. Of course Richard knew. The thought hit me like a physical blow. All those years of snide comments, of knowing smiles when Daniel was away for business. He'd been holding this knowledge over my head, without my even realizing there was something to know. Before I could respond, the study door opened. Richard stood there, a drink in hand, surveying the scene with what almost looked like satisfaction. I see you've met the other Mrs. Wilson, he said, sipping his whiskey. Well, not legally of course, but in all the ways that count. Richard, Vanessa acknowledged coolly. This isn't how we discussed doing this. He shrugged. Plans change. Now that Danny's gone, we all need to get on the same page about certain arrangements. What arrangements? I asked, finding my voice at last. Richard closed the door behind him and lowered himself into Daniel's leather chair. Financial ones, primarily. Danny boy wasn't quite as fiscally responsible as he led everyone to believe. Those business trips? Not always legitimate. The college funds for your kids? Mostly empty. The life insurance policy? Barely enough to cover the funeral. That's not possible, I whispered. Daniel was meticulous about our finances. About some finances, Richard corrected. Just not yours. Vanessa and Ethan have been quite well provided for. Haven't you, Van? Vanessa had the grace to look uncomfortable. Daniel set up a trust for Ethan's education, and he purchased the condo we live in. But I had no idea he was doing that at your family's expense, Rebecca. You have to believe that. My head was spinning. The perfect life I thought I had, already shattered by Daniel's death, was now revealing itself to be nothing but an elaborate facade. And somehow Richard had known all along. Why are you doing this? I asked him, struggling to understand his motivation. He was your brother. Something dark flashed across Richard's face. Yes, he was. Golden boy Daniel, who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. Who got every opportunity, every advantage, while I was treated like the family disappointment. Do you know what it's like to grow up in that shadow? To watch someone who seems so perfect from the outside but to know the truth. The bitterness in his voice was startling. I'd always known there was tension between the brothers, but this level of resentment suggested something deeper. When I found out about Vanessa and Ethan, Richard continued, it was like finally having proof of what I'd always known, that Daniel's perfect image was just that. An image. A lie. So this is revenge? I asked. Waiting until he's dead to expose his secrets? Richard leaned forward. No, Becky. This is practicality. Daniel left quite a mess behind, financially speaking. The firm has been investigating some irregularities in client accounts. Nothing concrete yet, but enough to freeze certain assets. You're going to need help navigating what comes next. And you're offering to help? I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. He smiled, that same knowing smile I'd seen countless times over the years. For a reasonable consideration, yes. I have certain documents that could prove very useful in protecting what assets remain. For both you and Vanessa. I looked between them, suddenly wondering if they were in this together. But Vanessa seemed genuinely distressed by the turn the conversation had taken. I didn't come here for money, she said firmly. I came because Ethan deserved to be acknowledged. And because I thought you deserved to know the truth, Rebecca. That's all. A knock at the study door interrupted us. Emma stood there, her face pale. Mom? There are people from Dad's firm asking to speak with you. They say it's important. Richard's expression changed subtly. A flicker of alarm quickly masked. Tell them your mother's indisposed. She'll speak with them tomorrow. Emma looked to me for confirmation. I straightened my shoulders. No, I'll see them now. In the living room, please. Richard stood abruptly. Becky, I strongly advise against that. Today of all days. Stop calling me Becky, I said with a calm I didn't feel. And stop pretending you're concerned about me. You've been waiting for this moment, haven't you? The chance to finally come out ahead of your brother. He didn't deny it, which was answer enough. I turned to Vanessa. I don't blame you or your son for Daniel's choices. But I need you to leave my home now. Whatever claims you may have on Daniel's estate will need to go through proper legal channels. To my surprise, she nodded without argument. I understand. Come on, Ethan. We've said our goodbyes. The boy, who had remained silent throughout the entire exchange, finally spoke. I'm sorry, he said simply, his voice breaking slightly. He always spoke highly of you and your kids. For what it's worth. The sincerity in his words, so like Daniel in their delivery, nearly broke me. I could only nod in acknowledgement as they left. Richard made no move to follow them. You're making a mistake, he said. Those firm representatives aren't here to offer condolences. They're here to protect themselves. Let me handle this. Like you handled telling me about my husband's second family? I shook my head. Get out, Richard. Whatever game you're playing, I want no part of it. His face hardened. Fine. But when everything comes crashing down, and it will, don't come crying to me. As he brushed past me, he paused. By the way, Daniel left something for you. A letter. He gave it to me months ago, made me promise to deliver it if anything happened to him. Ironic that he trusted me with that, isn't it? He pulled an envelope from his inner jacket pocket and placed it on the desk. Read it or don't. Makes no difference to me now. After he left, I stared at the envelope. My name was written on the front in Daniel's familiar handwriting. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Rebecca. Asterisk if you're reading this, then I'm gone and Richard has finally done what he's threatened to do for years, revealed my secrets. I've imagined this moment so many times, tried to find the words to explain, but there's no explanation that could justify what I've done to you and our children asterisk. Asterisk the truth is both simpler and more complicated than whatever Richard has told you. Yes, Vanessa and Ethan exist. No, they were not the only secret I kept from you. The financial situation is dire. But not for the reasons Richard will claim. Asterisk. Asterisk in my desk drawer behind the false panel, press the right corner of the drawer bottom. You'll find a USB drive containing everything you need to know. About the firm, about our finances, and about Richard's involvement in both. He's not the concerned brother he's pretending to be. Asterisk. Asterisk you deserved so much better than what I gave you. Than what I was. I hope someday somehow you can forgive me. Until then, protect yourself and our children. Don't trust Richard. And don't sign anything without speaking to Howard Brannon first. He's a lawyer, an old friend from college. His contact information is on the USB. Asterisk. I'm sorry for everything, Rebecca. Daniel. I read the letter twice, trying to process its implications. Then I moved to the desk drawer, finding the false panel exactly where Daniel had described. The USB drive was there, small and unassuming, potentially containing the key to understanding the mess my life had suddenly become. From the living room, I could hear the murmur of voices, The representatives from Daniel's firm, no doubt growing impatient. I had choices to make, decisions that would affect not just my future but Emma's and Lucas's as well. For 18 years I had followed Daniel's lead, trusted his judgment, built my life around his needs and ambitions. Now I was on my own, facing a reality I never could have imagined. I slipped the USB drive into my pocket and squared my shoulders. Whatever truths awaited me, I would face them head-on. Daniel may have lived a life of compartmentalization and secrets, but I refused to be just another casualty of his deception. As I walked toward the living room to meet with the firm representatives, I passed the hall mirror. The woman reflected there looked different somehow, older, yes, but also stronger. More determined. The weight of betrayal hung heavy on my shoulders, but there was something else there too. A straightening of the spine. A lifting of the chin. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, I was going to make decisions solely for myself and my children. Whatever Richard had planned, whatever Daniel had done, I would find my way through it. The reception guests parted as I walked through the room, their conversations quieting as I approached the 3 stern-faced individuals from Daniel's firm. I extended my hand to the one I recognized as the senior partner. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice steady, "I understand you have some matters to discuss with me." The oldest of the 3 nodded gravely. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm afraid we do. Perhaps somewhere more private." "Of course," I responded, leading them toward the kitchen, away from curious ears. "But first, I should mention that I'm in possession of some information that might be relevant to your concerns. Information my husband left specifically for this situation." Their exchanged glances told me everything I needed to know. Daniel's letter had been right about at least one thing. There was more to this story than Richard had revealed, and I was determined to uncover every last detail, no matter how painful the truth might be. As the kitchen door closed behind us, I gestured for the 3 men to take seats at the breakfast table, a place where my family had shared countless meals together. Now it felt like the setting for the final dismantling of that family's foundation. "Mrs. Wilson," began the senior partner, Harold Vance, a man I'd met several times at company functions. "First, please accept our condolences for your loss." The words sounded rehearsed, a necessary formality before getting to the real purpose of their visit. The other 2 men, younger associates whose names I couldn't recall, nodded in somber agreement. "Thank you," I replied simply. "Now what's this about?" Vance cleared his throat. "There are some irregularities in certain client accounts that Daniel had oversight of. Discrepancies that have raised concerns among the board of directors." "What kind of discrepancies?" I asked, thinking of the USB drive heavy in my pocket. "Funds that appear to have been redirected," said one of the younger men. "Significant amounts. You're suggesting my husband embezzled money." I stated it flatly, not as a question. Vance winced at my directness. "We're still conducting an internal investigation. Nothing has been proven yet." "But you've frozen assets connected to Daniel," I said, recalling Richard's words. "Including our family accounts?" The 3 men exchanged glances. "How did you?" began the second younger man before Vance silenced him with a look. "It's a precautionary measure," Vance said carefully. "Standard protocol in these situations until we can determine the extent of any improprieties." I folded my hands on the table, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. "And what about Richard's involvement? Have you looked into that as well?" The reaction was immediate and revealing. Vance's eyes widened slightly, while the younger associates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Richard," Vance repeated. "Daniel's brother isn't employed by our firm." "No, but he had connections to some of Daniel's clients, didn't he? Private arrangements that Daniel facilitated." I was fishing blindly, based on nothing but Richard's suspicious behavior and the cryptic reference in Daniel's letter. But the stunned silence that followed told me my shot in the dark had hit something solid. "Mrs. Wilson," Vance said finally, his tone measured, "whatever you think you know." "I don't think I know anything yet," I interrupted. "But I intend to find out everything. My husband left me information, records I believe of transactions and communications that might shed light on these irregularities you're investigating." This was a calculated risk. I hadn't actually viewed the contents of the USB drive yet, had no idea if it contained anything useful or merely more of Daniel's excuses and deceptions. If such records exist, Vance said carefully, the firm would consider it extremely valuable if you would share them with our investigation team. I'm sure they would, I replied. But my priority right now is protecting my children and their future. So before I share anything, I'll be consulting with my own legal counsel. Vance didn't bother hiding his surprise. I wasn't aware you had retained an attorney. There's a lot you're not aware of, I said, standing to indicate our conversation was finished. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have funeral guests to attend to. I'll have my lawyer contact you tomorrow. After they left, I leaned against the kitchen counter, my heart pounding. I had no lawyer. The only name I had was Howard Brannon, the contact Daniel mentioned in his letter, whom I'd never met or even heard of before today. A soft knock on the kitchen door interrupted my thoughts. Emma stood there, her young face etched with concern beyond her years. Mom? Are you okay? What's going on? I crossed the room and pulled her into a tight embrace. It's complicated, sweetheart. But we're going to figure it all out. Those people who came, that boy looked like Dad. She whispered against my shoulder. And Uncle Richard was acting weird, even for him. What aren't you telling me? I pulled back to look at her face. My daughter was no longer a child, and pretending otherwise wouldn't protect her from the reality we were now facing. Your father had secrets, Em. Significant ones that are only now coming to light. I don't have all the answers yet, but I promise when I do, I'll share what you need to know. Her eyes, so like her father's, searched mine. Are we going to be okay? It was the question I'd been asking myself since that first phone call from the hospital. For the first time, I felt I could answer honestly. Yes. It might get worse before it gets better, but we will be okay. I'll make sure of it. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of condolences and casseroles. Richard didn't return, and for that small mercy I was grateful. By evening, when the last guests had finally departed, exhaustion hit me like a physical wave. But I couldn't rest yet. After making sure both kids were settled in their rooms, I retreated to the home office with my laptop and Daniel's USB drive. My hands trembled slightly as I inserted it into the port. The drive contained a single folder labeled simply Truth. Inside were dozens of files, financial records, email exchanges, legal documents, and a video file titled, Watch This First. I clicked on the video and Daniel's face filled my screen. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed in a way I recognized from the final months of his life. I'd attributed it to work stress. Now I wondered if guilt had been eating away at him as well. Rebecca, he began, his voice slightly strained. If you're watching this, then I'm gone and you've found the USB. I've recorded this as a kind of insurance policy, though I hope to God you never need to see it. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I knew well. I've made terrible mistakes. Compromised myself in ways I never thought possible when we first met. The affair with Vanessa wasn't planned. That sounds like a pathetic excuse, I know. But it's the truth. What started as a one-time transgression became complicated when she got pregnant with Ethan. Daniel looked directly into the camera, his expression pained. I couldn't abandon my son, so I created a separate life, compartmentalized in a way that let me justify my actions. I told myself I was protecting you and our children by keeping these worlds apart. But in reality, I was just a coward. He took a deep breath. The financial situation is what you really need to understand. 7 years ago, the firm took on several high-net-worth clients through Richard's connections. Clients who wanted certain accommodations with their investments, tax avoidance strategies that crossed lines. Richard convinced me it was all technically legal, just aggressive planning. By the time I realized we'd moved into genuinely criminal territory, I was in too deep. My mind reeled. This wasn't just about an affair or secret family. This was potentially criminal activity. Richard blackmailed me, Daniel continued. Threatened to expose the affair and Ethan if I didn't continue managing these special client accounts. Then he started skimming from them himself. When I discovered that, it gave me leverage against him. We've been locked in this stalemate for years, each of us holding the other's destruction in our hands. He looked away from the camera briefly. 3 months ago, I began gathering evidence, building this file for you. I've also been working with a federal investigator carefully, discreetly. Her name is Sandra Myers. Her contact information is in the document labeled, Help. If I die before this is resolved, reach out to her immediately. Daniel's expression softened slightly. Rebecca, I know I've betrayed every promise I ever made to you. I've put you and our children at risk. There's no forgiveness I can ask for that would be adequate. But please believe me when I say I'm trying to make it right. The records here will protect you if used properly. Just be careful. Richard is more dangerous than I ever gave him credit for. He leaned forward, his face filling the screen. One last thing. I know I've forfeited any right to ask anything of you, but please, be kind to Ethan if you can. He's an innocent in all this. And he's Emma and Lucas's brother, whether any of you are ready to accept that or not. The video ended, leaving me staring at a blank screen, tears streaming down my face. Not for the husband I'd lost, but for the marriage that had been a lie all along. Over the next several hours, I dove into the files, piecing together the complex web Daniel and Richard had woven. Client accounts with inflated returns, offshore entities, backdated documents, and systematic siphoning of funds. It was sophisticated financial fraud on a scale I hadn't imagined possible. The most damning evidence implicated Richard far more deeply than Daniel. While my husband had certainly participated, the record showed Richard as the architect of the scheme, the one who had recruited the questionable clients and designed the fraudulent structures. There were recorded phone conversations, screenshots of text exchanges, and meticulous notes Daniel had kept documenting Richard's actions. By the time dawn broke, my eyes were burning with fatigue, but my mind was clear. I knew what I needed to do. First, I called Howard Brannon using the number from Daniel's files. Despite the early hour, he answered on the third ring. Mrs. Wilson, he said after I introduced myself, I've been expecting your call. Daniel told me there might come a time when you would need my help. That time is now, I confirmed, explaining the basics of my situation. Don't speak to anyone else about this, he advised. Not the firm, not Richard, not even family friends. I can be at your home by noon. Next, I contacted Sandra Myers, the federal investigator Daniel had mentioned. Her response was equally efficient. Mrs. Wilson, I'm relieved to hear from you. We were concerned when Agent Daniels reported your husband's death. The investigation is at a critical stage. Agent Daniels? I repeated, confused. There was a pause on the line. You didn't know? Your husband was working with us as a confidential informant. Agent Daniels was his handler. Another shock among many. My husband, whom I thought I knew so well, had been working secretly with federal investigators while maintaining a second family and participating in financial fraud. Who was this man I'd married? Can you come to my home? I asked. There are files you need to see, and I have questions only you can answer. I'll be there in an hour, she promised. After hanging up, I went to check on the children. Lucas was still asleep, his face peaceful in a way it hadn't been since we'd received news of his father's death. Emma's room was empty, her bed already neatly made. I found her in the kitchen making coffee. Couldn't sleep, she explained, pouring a cup and offering it to me. You look like you need this more than I do. I accepted gratefully. Thanks, sweetheart. She leaned against the counter, studying me. You were up all night in Dad's office. Did you find something? I hesitated, weighing how much to share. Yes. Complicated. But I think I understand now what's been happening, and what we need to do next. Emma nodded, her expression serious beyond her years. It's bad, isn't it? Whatever Dad was involved in. Parts of it, yes, I admitted. But there's more to the story than what it seems on the surface. She was quiet for a moment. That boy yesterday. He's our half-brother, isn't he? The directness of her question startled me. Yes. His name is Ethan. He's 16. Does Lucas know yet? I shook my head. No. I wanted to talk to you both together when the time was right. Emma sipped her coffee thoughtfully. Uncle Richard knew all along, didn't he? That's why he always made those weird comments about Dad. My daughter's perceptiveness shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. Yes. He used that knowledge against your father. I always thought there was something off about Uncle Richard, she said with unexpected vehemence. The way he looked at you sometimes when Dad wasn't watching. Like he was waiting for something. A chill ran through me at her words. I'd sensed that undercurrent too but had dismissed it as general dislike. Now I wondered if there had been more to it, if Richard's antagonism toward Daniel had extended to coveting his brother's wife as well. Before I could pursue that disturbing thought, the doorbell rang. I checked my watch. It was too early for either Brannon or Myers. "Stay here," I told Emma as I went to answer the door. Richard stood on my doorstep, immaculately dressed in another expensive-looking suit. His expression was conciliatory, but his eyes were cold and calculating as ever. "Becky," he began, "I think we got off on the wrong foot yesterday." "It's Rebecca," I corrected automatically. "And I have nothing to say to you." I started to close the door, but he blocked it with his foot. "I know about the USB drive, Rebecca. Daniel told me he was leaving you information." Fear flickered through me, but I kept my expression neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course you do. Just like I know you met with Vance and his lackeys yesterday. Did they tell you they're building a case against Daniel? Planning to pin everything on him now that he can't defend himself? Is that why you're here? To warn me?" I asked skeptically. "I'm here to help you," he insisted. "Whatever Daniel told you about me, it's not the whole truth. He was protecting himself, shifting blame. I have proof that would paint a very different picture." "I'll bet you do," I replied coldly. "Fabricated, just like everything else about you." His facade of concern dropped away. "You need me, Rebecca. More than you realize. The firm is freezing all your accounts. The house mortgage has a balloon payment coming due that Daniel never told you about. And there are clients who lost millions who would love to know where that money went." "Are you threatening me?" I asked, genuine curiosity in my voice. He seemed taken aback by my calm. "I'm stating facts. Without my help, you and those kids will have nothing." "I think I'll take my chances," I said, pushing against the door. "Now remove your foot before I remove it for you." For a moment I thought he might force his way in. Then from behind me came Emma's voice. "Is there a problem, Mom?" She stood in the hallway, her phone visibly recording the encounter. Richard's expression darkened as he spotted the phone. "Always Daddy's clever girl, aren't you, Emma? Just remember, you're not the only one who inherited his brains." With that cryptic remark, he withdrew his foot and turned to leave. "You'll regret this, Rebecca. When everything comes crashing down, remember I offered to help." I closed the door and locked it, then turned to Emma. "Good thinking with the phone." She shrugged. "True crime podcasts always record threatening encounters." I couldn't help the small laugh that escaped me despite the tension of the moment. "When did you get so smart?" "Learned from the best," she replied simply, and I knew she meant me, not Daniel. By mid-morning, my home had become command central for what felt like a covert operation. Howard Brannon arrived first, a trim, silver-haired man with piercing blue eyes and a reassuring competence about him. Sandra Myers followed soon after, younger than I'd expected, with a no-nonsense demeanor and a laptop tucked under her arm. I sent Emma to wake Lucas and take him out for breakfast, wanting to shield him from the initial discussions. Once they were gone, I shared everything I'd discovered with Brannon and Myers, including Richard's morning visit. "Your husband was gathering evidence against his brother and the firm for months," Myers confirmed, reviewing the files from the USB. "But he was walking a fine line, trying to protect himself enough to ensure he'd be offered immunity in exchange for his testimony." "And now?" I asked. "Where does his death leave the investigation?" "Complicated," she admitted, "but not impossible. These files are incredibly detailed. Daniel was thorough." Brannon nodded in agreement. "From a legal standpoint, there's enough here to negotiate with the prosecutors. You and the children weren't involved in any of this. With the right approach, we can protect your interests while still assisting the investigation." "What about Richard?" I asked. "He seems to think he can intimidate me into some kind of arrangement." Myers' expression hardened. "Richard Wilson is the primary target of our investigation. Has been from the beginning. Your husband only came onto our radar because of his connection to Richard. Based on what Daniel provided and what you've shown us today, Richard could be facing significant federal charges." A plan began to take shape over the next few hours. Myers would expedite protection for our family's legitimate assets, while using the evidence to build the case against Richard and his co-conspirators. Brannon would handle the civil side, negotiating with the firm and working to insulate us from potential lawsuits from defrauded clients. What about Vanessa and Ethan? I asked, the question that had been lingering in my mind since their appearance at the funeral. Brannon considered this. Legally, Ethan could have a claim on Daniel's estate as his biological child. But given the circumstances, the questionable finances, ongoing investigations, there might not be much of an estate left to claim. That's not why I'm asking, I clarified. Daniel asked me to be kind to Ethan. Said he was Emma and Lucas's brother, whether we were ready to accept that or not. Myers looked at me with newfound respect. That's remarkably generous considering the circumstances. I shook my head. It's not generosity. It's reality. Ethan exists. He's 16 years old and just lost his father. Whatever mistakes Daniel made, that boy shouldn't suffer for them. By afternoon, when Emma and Lucas returned, the initial framework of our plan was in place. I gathered my children in the living room, knowing the conversation ahead would be one of the hardest I'd ever had. There are things you need to know, I began carefully. About your father, about our financial situation, and about what happens next. Over the next hour, I explained as gently as possible the essentials of Daniel's deceptions, the affair, Ethan's existence, and financial misdeeds. I spared them the worst details but didn't sugarcoat the reality of our situation. Lucas cried, curling into himself on the couch. Emma remained stoic, asking occasional clarifying questions with a maturity that both impressed and saddened me. Neither deserved this burden. So we're broke? Lucas finally asked, his voice small. Not broke, I assured him. Things will be tight for a while. We may need to sell the house, adjust our expectations. But we have people helping us sort through it all. What about college? Emma asked. Dad always said our college funds were taken care of. I took a deep breath. Those accounts were largely empty, sweetheart. But that doesn't mean college is off the table. We'll find another way. Can I meet him? Lucas asked suddenly. Ethan, can I meet my brother? The question caught me off guard. Would you like to? He nodded hesitantly. Dad would want us to know each other, wouldn't he? Emma looked less certain but didn't object. I'll see if I can arrange it, I promised. When things are a bit more settled. That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen with a glass of wine, trying to process the whirlwind my life had become. In just 3 days I'd lost my husband, discovered his double life, uncovered a financial fraud scheme, and found myself working with federal investigators. The doorbell rang again. I tensed, fearing Richard had returned. But when I checked the security camera Myers had quickly installed that afternoon, I saw Vanessa standing on my porch, alone this time. I hesitated, then opened the door. I know it's late, she said immediately, but I needed to speak with you in private. I considered turning her away but found myself stepping aside to let her in. The kitchen, I said, leading the way. She looked different tonight, less polished, more human somehow. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and she wore minimal makeup. She clutched a manila envelope in her hands. Richard came to see me today, she began without preamble. He had an interesting proposition. I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He suggested that if Ethan and I pressed certain claims against Daniel's estate immediately, filed the right paperwork, made specific allegations, it would create leverage he could use in some ongoing negotiations. She placed the envelope on the table. These are the documents he wanted me to sign. And did you? I asked, not touching the envelope. She shook her head. No. Whatever existed between Daniel and me, it wasn't what Richard described. Daniel never promised me marriage or claimed he would leave you. He was clear about his commitments. Yet you continued the relationship for 8 years. I couldn't help pointing out. Vanessa didn't flinch from the accusation. Yes, it wasn't my proudest decision, but it gave me Ethan, and I can't regret that. I understood that sentiment even through my anger. Why are you showing me this? Why not just throw Richard's papers away and be done with it? Because I think you should know what you're dealing with, she replied. Richard isn't just trying to gain financially from Daniel's death. He seems fixated on you specifically. The way he talked about you was disturbing. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. What did he say? That Daniel never appreciated what he had. That you deserved better. She hesitated. That now that Daniel was gone, he could show you what you'd been missing all these years. The implication was clear, and it made my skin crawl. Emma's earlier observation about the way Richard looked at me suddenly seemed more significant. There's more, Vanessa continued. Richard mentioned something about a property in Lake Geneva. Said Daniel had signed it over to him recently, but that the transaction might not hold up to scrutiny. I frowned. Lake Geneva? Daniel never mentioned any property there. According to Richard, it was purchased through one of their offshore entities. A place called Evergreen Holdings. The name rang a bell. I'd seen it in the files on the USB drive, one of the shell companies used to move client funds. Thank you for telling me this, I said, genuinely appreciative despite the complicated feelings I had toward this woman. She nodded once. Whatever you might think of me, I don't want to see Richard succeed in whatever game he's playing. For Ethan's sake, if nothing else. After she left, I immediately called Myers and relayed the information about the Lake Geneva property. She promised to look into it first thing in the morning. The next day brought a flurry of activity. Brannon filed emergency petitions to protect our family home from immediate seizure. Myers secured court orders to freeze Richard's personal accounts based on the evidence we'd provided. The firm's partners were called to an emergency meeting, presumably to discuss damage control. Richard, meanwhile, had gone suspiciously quiet. No more visits, no phone calls. I should have been relieved, but the silence made me uneasy. That unease proved justified when Emma returned from school that afternoon, visibly shaken. Uncle Richard was waiting outside school, she reported, her voice trembling slightly. He tried to get me to go with him, said he needed to talk to me about Dad's real wishes for the family. My blood ran cold. What did you do? I told him I had to check with you first. Then I went back inside and called you. I hugged her tightly, proud of her quick thinking. You did exactly the right thing. I immediately reported the incident to Myers, who arranged for a patrol car to monitor our house overnight. We're closing in on him, she assured me. The Lake Geneva property was the missing piece. It's where most of the diverted funds ended up, invested in real estate held by Evergreen Holdings. Your brother-in-law was planning his exit strategy. Exit to where? I asked. The property was just the first step. We found passport applications, inquiries about countries without extradition treaties. Richard was planning to disappear with the money once the scheme inevitably collapsed. 3 days later, as I was preparing dinner, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Wilson? A formal voice inquired. This is Detective Morrow with the Lake Geneva Police Department. We have your brother-in-law, Richard Wilson, in custody. According to the detective, Richard had been caught attempting to remove items from the Lake Geneva property after police had already sealed it as part of the federal investigation. When confronted, he'd become belligerent, then tried to flee. There's something else, the detective added. We found documents in his possession, forged signatures, what appears to be an attempt to transfer ownership of your current residence to himself, and a set of keys to your home that he claimed you'd given him. A chill ran through me as I recalled Richard's unexplained absence after the funeral reception. Had he been in our house, going through our belongings, making copies of our keys? The violation felt personal in a way that even the financial crimes hadn't. Within a week, Richard was formally charged with multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and attempted theft. The investigation expanded to include several partners at Daniel's firm who had been aware of or complicit in the scheme. Daniel's role was acknowledged but treated with relative leniency given his cooperation before his death and the evidence he'd compiled. Slowly, our lives began to find a new rhythm. The house would have to be sold eventually. There was no way around that, but Brannon had negotiated a reasonable timeframe that would allow us to find a suitable alternative. Daniel's life insurance policy, which Richard had claimed was negligible, actually had a significant death benefit that had been untouched by the fraud investigation. Most importantly, Emma and Lucas were showing remarkable resilience. After several careful conversations and a few supervised meetings, they had begun to develop a cautious relationship with Ethan. It wasn't seamless. There were awkward moments and occasional flares of resentment, but they were trying, which was all I could ask. 1 month after Daniel's funeral, I stood in his study, sorting through the last of his personal items. Most would be donated or discarded, but some photographs, his college ring, the watch his father had given him, would be kept for the children. In the back of his closet, I found a small wooden box I'd never seen before. Inside were ticket stubs from our first date, the hospital bracelet from when Emma was born, a Father's Day card Lucas had made in 2nd grade. Tangible reminders that despite his betrayals, some part of Daniel had genuinely treasured our family. At the bottom of the box was a folded piece of paper. A job offer letter dated 6 years ago from a small financial firm in Madison, Wisconsin. The salary was significantly less than what Daniel had been making, but the position sounded legitimate, honest. He had never mentioned it to me. I sat on the floor of the closet, holding that letter, wondering about the road not taken. Had Daniel considered leaving the fraudulent scheme? Walking away from the deceptions and starting fresh? What had stopped him? Fear, greed, or simply the weight of too many secrets already accumulated? That evening, as I prepared dinner with Emma's help, my phone pinged with a text message. It was from Vanessa. Richard's lawyer reached out today. He's offering a deal. He'll provide information on additional hidden assets if I agree to testify that Daniel was the mastermind behind everything. Thought you should know. I told them to take a hike. I smiled despite myself. Whatever complicated feelings I had about Vanessa, in this at least we were allies. Mom! Lucas called from the dining room where he was setting the table. Can Ethan come over this weekend? He said he could help me with my science project. I looked at Emma, gauging her reaction. She shrugged. It's fine with me. He's actually not terrible once you get past the whole secret brother thing. 6 months after Daniel's death, I stood in the living room of our new home. A modest but comfortable townhouse closer to the children's school. Many of our old belongings had been sold or left behind, physical reminders of a life built on illusions. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Ethan standing there, overnight bag in hand for his now regular weekend visit. At 17, he was growing to look more like Daniel every day. But there was a gentleness in his manner that reminded me more of Lucas. Ms. Rebecca. He greeted me with the formal address he'd settled on, neither too familiar nor too distant. Is it still okay if I stay over? Of course, I replied, stepping aside to let him in. Emma's out with friends, but Lucas has been waiting for you. Something about a new video game he wants to show you. As I watched him bound up the stairs to find his half-brother, I felt the now familiar mix of emotions his presence always evoked. Sadness for what might have been, anger at the deceptions that had brought us here, but also a strange gratitude for the unexpected family that had emerged from the wreckage of my marriage. Later that night, after the boys had finally gone to sleep and the house was quiet, I sat on my small patio with a glass of wine, looking up at the stars. My journalism degree, long dormant, had found new life in a part-time position with a local magazine. It wasn't the career I'd once dreamed of, but it was a beginning, my beginning on my terms. My phone lit up with a text message from Sandra Myers. * final sentencing for Richard tomorrow. Thought you might want to know. Expected 12 to 15 years. * Justice of a sort. Not for the betrayal of my marriage or the years I'd invested in a relationship built on lies. There was no legal remedy for those wounds. But for the financial crimes, for the attempted manipulation of my children, for the violation of our home and safety, for those at least there would be consequences. I typed back a simple response. Thank you for everything. The stars above seemed brighter somehow, the night air fresher than it had been in months. For 18 years I had been Rebecca Wilson, Daniel's wife, mother to his children, keeper of his home. That version of me had died with him, buried alongside the illusions of our perfect life. In her place stood someone new, stronger, wiser, with hard-won knowledge of her own capabilities. Someone who had faced betrayal and loss but refused to be defined by either. Someone who had learned that sometimes, the end of one story is simply the beginning of another. As I looked toward the horizon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in longer than I could remember. Possibility. The future stretched before me, unwritten and full of potential. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, I was the author of my own life, and I intended to make every word count.